Just refreshing myself to the new system here. I think we got things under control. Good afternoon and welcome to the December 16th regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. Up front, we have the consent agenda for the minutes of the council meeting held December 2nd, 2024, and approval of the council meeting agenda. Do I have a mover and a second for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Beale. Any errors, omissions, or discussion? All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you. For presentations, we have one presentation today. From the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, the short-term rentals in Parksville, Oceanside, a presentation by Blaine Seapost, the PQBDA Executive Director, and E. Swanson. Is it Eric? Yeah, thanks, Eric. Sorry. Eric Swanson of Third Place Planning regarding short-term rentals in Parksville and the wider Oceanside region. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
And as far as the clicker goes, what am I clicking to advance the slides here? Arrows on the keyboard. Okay, cool. Thank you. So good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Eric Swanson and I'm a principal with Third Space Planning. And today I'll be sharing some key findings from a study we completed for the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association on the impacts of short-term rentals on the city, particularly the accommodation and housing markets. So we're based in Victoria. We're specialists in short-term rental regulations. We've written a comprehensive toolkit on the subject, partnering with FCM and UBCM and others a few years ago. And since then, we've been consulting on regulatory design, facilitating council goal setting workshops. And we've also been doing these kinds of impact studies, looking at the impacts of short-term rentals on communities. So the goal of the present study with Blaine and team was to understand the scale of short-term rental activity. Oh, you're going to skip for me. Oh, thanks, Blaine. Yeah, appreciate that. Understand the scale of impacts on Parksville's accommodation and housing markets. All of our findings are contained in a comprehensive impacts report. You can switch there, bud. Thanks. And which I believe has been circulated. And one thing to note up front is that the reference period for this study was June 1st, 2023 to May 31st, 2024. And this reference period roughly corresponds with the approximate 12 months before BC's new provincial regulations came into force. So as such, this study can be treated as kind of a pre-BC regulation baseline. Actually, just stay on that slide. I was one ahead of you. So go back to the bullet list, pink bullet list. So we'll go through a few things today in under 20 minutes here. I'm going to start with some terminology. Then we'll recap the basic policy context, both provincially and here in Parksville, where Parksville stands in relation to others. Next, we'll take a look at some baseline data describing Parksville's short-term rental, traditional accommodation, and housing markets. And that baseline data will then allow us to calculate a range of impacts stemming from short-term rentals in Parksville. At the end, I'll go over 3 quick forward-looking topics, including the value of continued monitoring, the major trade-offs on this particular issue, and the value of resolving them by setting clear prioritized goals for local short-term rental regulations. And without presupposing what kinds of local regulatory adjustments you might be interested in, I can flag a few key considerations. So before we get into the presentation proper, I'll define a few key terms. Sometimes the term short-term rental or short-term vacation rental is used broadly to refer to any type of unit listed on short-term rental platforms like Airbnb, VRBO. But there are plenty of hotels, motels, and of course, resort listings on these platforms as well. So more specifically, when I use the term today and in the report, we mean the rental of a residential dwelling unit for a short period of time. In prior years, 30 days was a common cutoff. Now it's more common to get to 90. I call attention to the dwelling unit term in there because this definition does not include units that were originally built and intended as tourist accommodation. So your resort drive units, et cetera. To drive this distinction home in both the study and in this presentation, we use the term residential short-term rental to clarify that we're talking about the kind of short-term rentals taking place in dwelling units. So at times I'll be using the terms traditional or the term traditional accommodation. That's intended as a catch-all term to refer to the types of accommodation we were all kind of used to before the advent of these new platforms. So hotels, motels, resorts, inns, B&Bs. You could also lump campgrounds in here. I've highlighted B&Bs because while we consider them a traditional style of accommodation, most municipal bylaws have included them for decades. They, of course, overlap with short-term rentals because they're taking place in dwelling units. So having established a few of these key terms, let's move on to policy context. And here I want to focus on what types of units are allowed as short-term guest accommodation. So in Parksville's bylaws and in many other communities, we can refer to two main types of units. We've got tourist accommodation units and we've got dwelling units. And they're in quotation marks because both are, formal terms in your bylaws. Tourist accommodation units are those that are intended for seasonal occupancy and visitor accommodation and include resort condos, motels, hotels, cabins in the resort drive area and downtown waterfront, or units in those two areas. And they're allowed where zoning obviously allows for them, and they can still be listed on short-term rental platforms. By contrast, dwelling units are intended for full-time residential use, and they cannot be used as short-term rental tourist guest accommodation unless they've got a Parksville bed and breakfast license. And B&Bs can only go in one's single-family residential home, including any attached suites, but not any detached suites. So thanks to the collective advocacy of you all here and, Blaine and others, this distinction between the two basic types of units still holds under BC's new regulations such that, resort drive units, strata hotels, et cetera, can continue to operate as before. So moving on now, I'm going to show you a table of where Parksville's current regulations fall on a spectrum from more permissive approaches on the bottom to more restrictive / housing protective approaches up top. I've got this little yellow box around the new provincial floor regulation, which restricts short-term rentals to your home dwelling unit, plus up to one other unit somewhere on your home lot. Parksville's current regulations, which I've labeled, B&B style, put it slightly above this provincial floor in terms of housing protection because it does not allow bed and breakfasts / short-term rentals to operate in detached suites. At the top, you've got the gold standard for housing protection, which is where you can only operate a short-term rental in your home dwelling unit. So not including any separate suites, whether attached or detached. And we've got plenty of examples of this, like in Vancouver, Victoria, elsewhere. At the bottom, you've got more permissive programs that allow short-term rentals to operate outside of your home lot, which I've labeled here as commercial short-term rentals, though none of this terminology is set in stone. And examples include places that have opted out of the provincial regulations, and I've got some listed there. There are other important aspects to the new provincial regulations, including the requirement to include a valid business license. And Parksville, of course, has its own specific regulations pertaining to parking and guest intensity and that sort of thing. But this is a big distinction I wanted to highlight, just placing Parksville on the spectrum here. So now let's move on to some of the key baseline data that we included and found in the study. And we'll start by describing Parksville's traditional accommodation market. I'm just going to give a few highlights. You can find a bunch more detail on the study proper. So as far as traditional accommodation goes, you've got 930-ish fixed roof, hotel, motel, resort, and inn units across the city, around 2/3 of which are condo style units. And I've bolded that as important because it means you've got plenty of amenity-rich accommodation units without needing to turn to residential short-term rentals, in contrast to many communities which don't have these condo style units. And so short-term rentals tend to be one of the only sources of these. On top of these units, you've got 24 active B&B licenses at the time of the study, 20 of which were actually located in the city proper according to their business address. However, we weren't able to say for certain how many of these were actually operating during the reference period without further information. Next slide there, please, Blaine. So putting all these units on a map kind of shows the obvious pattern where you've got your purple hotels, motels, inns, and resorts largely concentrated in the resort drive area and on the waterfront there, with licensed B&Bs scattered throughout the remainder of the city. So now we can turn to some base data on the short-term rental market during that reference year. And the first obvious question is, how many of these things are there? It's unfortunately tricky to answer for three main reasons. These things are constantly switching off and on, unlike, for example, hotel units that are generally listed year-round. In our case, we didn't have access yet to the province's new data sharing platform, so we had to rely on third-party scraping services, which are pretty good, but still not perfect. And thirdly, in Parksville, most Airbnb and VRBO listings are actually for what the city considers to be tourist accommodation. So you're well familiar with that distinction by now. So they're not actually residential short-term rentals, and so we had to actually manually pull those out of the data set to focus on the impacts of these residential ones. So these complications mean there's no one way to answer the question of how many short-term rentals are in the city. Instead, we kind of have to use a variety of measures and paint a combined picture. So we'll go through those one by one. The first answer we can give is that short-term rental activity is obviously highly seasonal, as shown by this chart. This isn't a surprise to you here. You know, the peaks are in the summer, the troughs are in the winter. The main takeaway is just the seasonality, not the absolute numbers, which require a bit more dissection. Recalling our definition of short-term rentals, we're really only talking about those dwelling units here. We found that only 1/3 of Airbnb and VRBO listings during the reference period were for actual dwelling units. So that's kind of the green slice of the pie there. The rest were for tourist accommodation units in the Resort Drive area, downtown waterfront. There were some RV and park model units on there at Park Sands and Surfside, and some hotel and motel units at places like the Coast Parksville, Tides Inn, et cetera. So this pie chart just shows percentages. We'll talk absolute numbers in a moment. This is what that pie chart looks like when you put it on a map. So these are not exact locations because the platforms obscure those, but it still gives you a sense of the distribution. So you've got your red Resort Drive units, your hotel and motel listings in yellow. We've got some RV and park model units in green. Licensed B&Bs are in orange, and then the blue ones. The blue ones are the residential short-term rental listings across the city. So we're still kind of putting that combined picture together. The third answer we can give is at maximum, there were at least 108 residential short-term rentals during the reference period, so active at least one day during the reference year, a pretty low bar, so at maximum. Because of data limitations, the actual number might be about 10% higher than this, based on kind of some of the more minor platforms, but this is a good ballpark. Next thing we can say is that total residential short-term rental activity, all of the availability during the year, was equivalent to 49 full-time hotel units. So if you take all the availability, you put it in a blender, because they're constantly turning off and on, you come out with around 50 full-time hotel units. The next thing we can say, we're almost at the end here of like the 6 answers I can give to that basic question, is that during the reference period, the number of these residential short-term rentals was equivalent to around 36 lost potential homes or non-principal residences. So these are places where, from the data, we can say it is unlikely that someone actually lives. If you're interested in the methodology, I can speak to it more later. And number 6, a growing number. This is the final answer we can give to that basic question. We saw a 5% growth in these things over that reference year. So listing and licensing status. After the reference period took effect, or after reference period, so just after the BC regulations took effect, we saw that 50% of residential short-term STR listings had disappeared. 44 were still listed but without a license, and so non-compliant, and 10 were listed but with a license. That was immediately after. Things have undoubtedly changed a bit since then, but interesting to know. Moving now on to some base data from the housing market. This is something you as a council talk about a lot. So I'm just going to share a couple of our own, key stats that we like to look to. And the first has to do with vacancy rate. And this was Parksville's rental vacancy rate at the time of the study. A healthy balanced vacancy rate is often said to be somewhere around 3%. This 3% threshold also shows up in BC's short-term rental regulations, whereby if communities can show a 3% rate for at least 2 consecutive years, they can opt out. I can tell a longer story about where that 3% kind of number comes from and how it can best be used. And you feel free to ask when I'm done. But the short story is to be careful about using 3% as some kind of magic number. It's not. The next thing I want to point to is the number of Parksville households in some form of housing need. So at last count, so this is the 2021 census, there were over 1,800 existing households experiencing some form of formally defined housing need. So that's more than a quarter of all the city's households and represents approximately 3,600 individuals. Most are struggling with housing affordability, so the big orange slice there on the screen. The remainder were living in housing that wasn't suitable, which means not big enough for their family composition, or not adequate, which means in need of major repairs or some combination thereof. I've also got a longer story here about the difference between this housing need and what is sometimes called core housing need, but we like to focus on this. I can explain more if you're interested afterward. So now we've covered some baseline data and we're able to pull out some impacts of all of this activity on both the accommodation and housing markets, starting with the accommodation market. So residential short-term rentals accounted for approximately 5% of your accommodation market, specifically 5% of the city's stock of fixed roof accommodation units, accommodating around 5% of visitor demand, generating around 5% of revenue. So just 5%, 5% is the way to think about it. On the one hand, this can be seen as a positive contribution to the city stock of accommodation. And on the other hand, this can be seen as direct competition with residential short-term rentals, taking 5% of bookings and revenue from other providers. As we'll discuss in a moment, residential short-term rentals also decrease both the availability and affordability of housing, including staff housing, which is an ongoing challenge for accommodation providers in addition to other local businesses, of course. In some smaller communities, residential short-term rentals provide a much more significant share of overall accommodation and often provide the only significant source of amenity-rich units, with kitchens, more rooms, et cetera. And this is one of the reasons why BC's regulations exempt smaller communities, but that's not the case in Parksville. We found no statistical sense in which residential short-term rentals are needed. Most of your tourist accommodation is already condo style, so amenity rich. And we calculated that if residential short-term rentals just magically disappeared, the city would still have had a surplus of units during the peak month as well as, of course, during the low months when there was plenty of units available. So turning now to the impacts of residential STRs on the housing market. The first thing we found is that in Parksville, residential short-term rentals are more than twice as profitable as long-term renting the same type of unit. This is actually quite consistent with calculations we pull for a range of other communities. This is a pretty common ratio here. So there's a strong financial incentive to convert long-term rentals to short-term rentals is the takeaway there. And this financial incentive likely played a large role in the conversion of this estimated 36 homes into commercial short-term rentals, which is equivalent to around 2% of the city's housing stock. 2% can seem small, but just keep in mind, that vacancy rate of 1.4% currently. So put another way, residential short-term rentals are decreasing the housing supply. And when you decrease housing supply and you increase the economic value of housing, so we're calling that it's twice as profitable, it should be no surprise that, the cost of housing can and does increase as a result. So there are several studies going back a few years now that attempt to kind of quantify this impact, including on the city of Parksville specifically. The most recent study was done last year, July 23, and it found that over the course of 2022, so a single year, commercial short-term rentals led to Parksville rents increasing by $400 per year that year. So in addition to all of the impacts on previous years. You can refer to the report, which has kind of a variety of cuts of this data and qualifications as well. And a note of caution I'm going to throw in, I'm not totally confident that these studies successfully separated out the resort drive units, for example. So I think this impact might be slightly overstated. But the main takeaway for us and potentially for you is that they do increase rent prices. It gets complicated when you try to model it, but rents do go up and it's intuitive why that happens. And the final thing we can say with confidence is that similarly, residential short-term rentals increase home prices, so the cost to buy a home. And unlike with rents, there's actually no local modeling on this. Even across Canada, it's more rare to have this. But there are plenty of other studies from across North America that kind of point to the same basic impact. The number is going to vary, but the logic is the same. If you can make more money on a property and supply goes down, costs can increase. So moving forward, almost done here. Having summarized some of the key impacts of residential short-term rentals on your local accommodation and housing markets, I'd like to conclude with just a few considerations to keep in mind moving forward. And the first has to do with the value of continued monitoring. So it would be a good idea to, combine the data that Parksville is able to get from the province with third-party data that Blaine and his organization is able to get through their subscription to see kind of what the differences are. And whether there's a clear kind of best data source or combination of data and best methodology for keeping track and tabs on local short-term rentals. And in doing so, a key thing will be just to keep those tourist accommodation units kind of pulled out so they're not muddying the waters. And you might want to think about ways to also better track local licensed bed and breakfast activity. And this could include low effort options like requesting that B&B operators submit an annual guest registry. So how many nights was it booked, that sort of thing, whether they're actually operating that year. And finally, to the extent that you're interested in doing so, it is totally possible to enforce your existing regulations and fine non-compliant short-term rentals. Even before BC kind of launches their latest tools in principal residence registries, et cetera. What we tend to recommend if you did want to do this is hiring a new full-time kind of dedicated bylaw staff person who can focus on this for a little bit. You know, one FTE in other communities has sufficed, and generally would look like a big push up front and then kind of lower effort thereafter as you kind of get through that first wave of enforcement. And one thing we like to point out is that this can be kind of high return on investment. You know, the cost of a bylaw staff person, you could free up potentially, like we were seeing 36 homes there. You know, depending on how you look at that's pretty good return on investment. A couple slides left to briefly talk about trade-offs and goals. And so we don't need to squint at this slide too much, but if you were considering updating your bylaws to treat short-term rentals any differently than you do now, you know, one of the things we'd suggest is that you first dedicate some time to discuss the major trade-offs on this issue and resolve them in one direction or another by deciding on a list of prioritized goals. And this table, we just threw this in. It's a framework we often use when we facilitate council goal-setting workshops on this topic. We use some version of it. And next slide there, please, Blaine. Imagining some point in the future where, you know, you've got a refreshed sense of what your goals are for short-term rentals moving forward. One way to think about possible adjustments is where you want to sit on this table like this. Is your current positioning aligned with your goals, or might you want to move up or down it with BC's floor as a reference point there? So thank you very much. Really appreciate your attention. I know that was a bit long, but happy to take any questions with Blaine here.
That's great. Thank you very much, Eric, for your presentation. We're a bunch of us kind of taking notes as we're going along. Council, I'll leave it open to the floor for any questions for the delegation today. Councillor Beal, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Eric, for the presentation. I thought that was very, very interesting. A couple of points that stood out to me. One is that the reduction of short-term rentals did not seriously reduce the amount of tourist accommodation, that in fact we still had a number. I know that in a previous council, I was a liaison to the Tourism Association, and I know that that was a question that came up. You know, the thought was at the time that short-term rentals, you know, they're not really hurting, that in fact it provides enough space for everyone, but it looks like they're not necessarily needed, and that we have a number of condo type tourist accommodation available, which is really important for families, I think. So that, I thought that was really great, great to see. And I was curious about the your last comment about having some bylaw enforcement. And can you give us some examples of other communities that have successfully pursued enforcing the bylaws and done so successfully?
For sure. And I could even follow up with like a more fulsome list, but it always tends to be, you know, a little bit of a learning curve. So that's what I was saying, like a push up front. Victoria's obviously done quite a bit of work. Vancouver was one of the vanguard leaders in this. They've got quite a bit more units to deal with. Penticton has been on top of this for quite a while now, several years. We worked with them last year to kind of update their enforcement approach. I'd be happy to follow up though and give you some examples. Yeah.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. It's not often that we get a hot pink cover slide, so that's kind of interesting.
I could take that off.
I like it. I lived in Whistler for 7 years, and when we moved to Whistler in say 93 or something, to find a long-term rental, you get the local newspaper. You know, in 10 years, I won't even be able to say local newspaper. They probably won't even, people won't know what that is. But you flip through and there's pages and pages of long-term rentals at the time. And my wife and I were married there, and so we kind of go back every year for a weekend. We were there in October, and I always like grabbing the paper to see how many long-term rentals there are in Whistler. And there's one one long-term rental instead of pages and pages. And to me, this is society trying to catch up with the technology, the platform that allows you to make a lot more money with your home or a suite or a carriage home or something, and not have to deal with that long-term tenancy act. And I think the province could have done a lot better in you don't want to come down obviously hard on the renters, but I think homeowners would feel a lot more comfortable if that tenancy act also backed them up a little bit more. It's nothing against having businesses that help support your mortgage with short-term rentals. I have nothing against that. But when homes are so expensive because people are going to make money with their homes, then that's a real problem for the people who can't afford the down payment. And so all they can do is long-term rent. And when you have a lack of long-term rentals, this is kind of going over the whole subject, but I just wanted to kind of go over it for myself too, then that causes a problem for the rest of society. And so that's what all of this is kind of society trying to manage the technological increases that we see with the platforms such as Airbnb. I love the work that you guys did on this, and we in this resort town, we kind of deal with the same thing that Whistler does. Tofino, when you live in a beautiful place like Parksville and on Vancouver Island, then we're going to be dealing with rental issues and housing issues because everyone wants to live here. So I'll stop ranting, but thank you again for your presentation.
Staying on this side of the room, Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for the presentation. And it's been great to be able to follow this issue quite a bit, maybe more closely through my role at the Tourism Association. And I'd like to thank Blaine and the rest of the Tourism Association for the excellent work on this issue, which is a very complex issue. I have a couple of questions. The first one is maybe if you can just back up a step in terms of what is, like, if you can speak a little bit to the overall objective of looking at this issue to begin with, kind of building a little bit on what Councillor Wood said in the regard that this technology we've always had a situation where people can rent out their home long-term because there's no formal way of doing it. You can just say, hey, buddy, you want to come live in my house? And we start, and then Tenancy Act comes along. But there's no kind of easy way to do that on a platform in the way that you can with short-term rentals. And so then we say, oh no, now this is hurting the business of people who have been renting long-term. It's been hurting that kind of side of the real estate market. But in another sense, it's actually opened up a whole new opportunity for a homeowner to have a more affordable home. So that's why I asked kind of like the fundamental question we're asking here. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that. Like, are we just looking at the devastating impact on the long-term rental industry, or are we also contextualizing the impact on the ability to afford a home to begin with?
That's a great question. So I'm going to deal with it in a couple different ways. So one of the biggest trade-offs on this whole issue is the ability of short-term rentals to provide, in some cases, much needed accommodation. So this is, to your point, in some communities it is needed, and in some cases it's statistically not needed. And the flip side of that, which is impacts on both the long-term rental and housing markets, both supply and affordability. So those impacts are well established. And so in this study, we were trying to determine, are residential short-term rentals needed? And the answer we found was not particularly no. You still got even in peak month of August, you still have a surplus of accommodation units. And we're finding these negative impacts on both long-term affordability of renting, affordability of long-term renting and home ownership. Now, the case you bring up is something we've actually dove into. What about those homeowners who operate a short-term rental and in so doing are better able to afford their mortgage payments or whatever? That is true for those households to a varying degree. I think we might have included a long discussion on this in this report. If not, it was in the Qualicum Beach one. Maybe we should send it in advance or afterwards. But the thing is, there will only be a small number of households who can benefit from that impact. The tourism market is only so big. We've already got the surplus during peak month. We do see a bit of growth, but the vast majority of your prospective homeowning households will not be taking advantage of this affordability or this, extra income gain. And it will come at the cost of increased home prices and rents for everyone else. So that's kind of like the embedded trade-off there. The second thing is, once the short-term rental market becomes established and that kind of double multiplier becomes known, like it's twice as profitable, the cost of housing goes up. And so even if you're a prospective homeowner who wants to buy a home and use it as a short-term rental, you're probably going to be paying more for that house up front because the cost has already been priced into the unit. And so whether that's cheaper for you long-term gets all spreadsheet even beyond what we need to get into here, right? Over like what interest rates are or whatever. But the story of short-term rentals are a mortgage helper is a very niche benefit to some people in some circumstances, whereas the cost, like the downside on affordability and availability, is citywide. And that's what we tend to point out there.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I can do my follow-up. Thank you. Because it's directly related, or maybe not. So I appreciate that meta look at things, because I think it's important that we ground ourselves in the overall thinking on all this stuff at a provincial level. But zooming back now to our area, as we consider policies at this table around short-term rentals, we have to recognize that we're in a very somewhat unique region here, that we have, 2 municipalities, plus we're surrounded by a bunch of regional district areas that, for most people, they don't even realize that, right? So especially if you're coming here to rent, like for vacation or something, you have no clue what's Parksville and what's area F or whatever, right? So can you provide, maybe not today, but can we get some more context around the fact that we have a different regulatory setup and different pressures and different situation immediately across the street from us in other regional district areas?
Yeah. Go for it, Blaine.
So as Eric had mentioned, that we created this similar report for the town of Qualicum Beach recently. So using both of those now that we have them can be something that's like between the city and the town, you can review that. We did have an ultimate goal of doing another one of these reports for the regional district areas that we represent. But now that the province has stepped in with the regulations that they've implemented currently, plus the new principal residence requirement that's going to be coming up with the registry next year, it remains to be seen whether or not we need to do that for the regional district. But we definitely, we know how to get a hold of Eric if we need that. And I think ultimately, the work that Eric can do in supporting councils in determining what those next steps are for what's best for Parksville, what's best for Qualicum Beach, or for the regional district. It's really up to councils to decide what those next steps are. If you want to change that sort of hierarchy, do you want to get more restrictive or do you want to get more permissive? These are all things that, like, Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism is happy to support councils with using Eric's expertise. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks. And I do want to thank again for the awesome work that the Tourism Association does. It takes a very collaborative approach with all the different players involved in this, and doesn't take sort of like a turf protecting or anything. It's really great and very much appreciated.
Councillor Gorey, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. I had the same question as Councillor Grens about how we fare as a region, since we are so intertwined with municipalities and the electoral districts. If you can tell me from your experience, I saw in the chart, we can go either more restrictive, like say Victoria, or something like Tofino, which is again a very tourist town like us. What are some of the lessons learned, let's say, in the last couple of years? How being something like Tofino's regulations compared to Victoria? First of all, how does it impact the housing availability? And second, what does the tourist accommodation sector think of which way is more beneficial, let's say, just for the tourism industry?
I'll leave the latter question to Blaine and I'll take the first one. And so starting with the first wave of short-term rental regulations a few years ago, I guess more than a few years ago now, but with Vancouver, which was one of the first to institute the principal residence requirement. So just in your home dwelling unit, no basement suites allowed, no accessory dwelling units allowed. There have been formal studies of, the city released their own data, but there have also been academic studies showing how much housing was freed up, and a significant amount. It's not on the tip of my tongue, the exact number, but it was, thousands and thousands of units that were converted back to long-term rentals. During the first month or two, so I guess it would be May, and even the months preceding, I guess, last year before the provincial regulations took effect. In Victoria, we saw a lot of the downtown condo units that had been under this legal non-conforming status allowed as short-term rentals. A bunch of those just flooded the market and so came back on. I don't think the city has actually quantified that yet, but it was significant as well. So the short answer I can give is that at the top of that table, the spectrum, like the gold standard best practice, if you just restrict it to principal dwelling unit, Vancouver, Victoria, Toronto, all the places, academic studies, that is the option that is pointed to as the quantifiably most impactful for both housing availability and affordability. Pardon me. You'll get some impact as you kind of go lower down, a little bit less. Cottage suites are still important long-term housing, et cetera. So if you allow those as short-term rentals, you're going to get, less housing protection, obviously. I hope that answers your question. And over to Blaine on the second.
We've been tracking short-term vacation rentals for a long time in our region. And originally, before a lot of these regulations even came into place in Vancouver, I think the traditional accommodation industry basically wanted a level playing field, right? They wanted to make sure that short-term vacation rentals were being taxed in the same way, that they're treated in the same way as far as like zoning is concerned and all those kinds of things. And some of that has come to place, right? We do have short-term vacation rental hotel room tax in British Columbia. And there have been a lot more regulations that have been imposed on short-term vacation rentals. So I think that generally, there's going to be a sliding scale between accommodation owners and operators, but I think a lot of them recognize the fact that that playing field has been leveled more than what it was before. I think the reports that Eric has put together for both Parksville and Qualicum Beach now, to compare against Qualicum Beach, we know that there's actually a hotel room shortage in Qualicum Beach as a part of the work that we did. Whereas in Parksville, we don't have a shortage of hotel rooms. So it's good to be able to have that context as well. So when council is considering proposals or if investors are coming into the community, being able to share some of this information is valuable to them too. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Follow-up
Yes,
question.
thank you, Mayor. And follow up to Eric. So my guess is, since this frees up more short-term rentals being converted to long-term, I'm guessing that also kind of brings the prices down for rent. And like you mentioned, the impact is about $400, which you said is maybe inflated. I do believe, I think there's other factors, obviously, with the mortgage rates going so high and the inflation being high. I wonder how much of that plays into this 400 level increase rather than just the short-term rentals being there.
Yeah, that's a great question too. And the author of those studies would be able to speak to this better than I can, but I can summarize what he has said in response to the exact same types of questions. And so the COVID pandemic provided a unique opportunity to separate out some of those variables. This kind of modeling is always going to be complicated because, as you see, you've got interest rates, you've got variable rates of supply and demand, et cetera. But what he was able to do in, economic modeling details that I can't speak to is separate it out. And so he's able to separate out by looking at all BC communities and kind of leveling the playing field, what impacts were directly attributable to short-term rentals versus other things. And this is now kind of peer reviewed and established. That 400 number, $400 a year increase in rent measure that I mentioned was just for 2022. And so it stacks on impacts during 2021 and 2020 and 2019. Again, go to the report and there's a couple pages where it takes different cuts at this modeling to express it in different ways. But again, the takeaway is that rents do go up as residential short-term rentals increase, and they actually go down when short-term rentals decrease. And to your earlier question, actually I should have mentioned this. Short story is that kind of gold standard housing protection does increase availability for sure. And what he has found in his follow-up studies, this is Dr. David Walksmith from McGill, is that rents also decline in comparison to places where it's not happening. So it works both ways.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have carriage homes here. We have 132, I think, or something like that. Are they involved with the short-term rentals or long-term rentals? Do you have any understanding of that? Because they're not attached to the houses, carriage homes. Thank you.
Yep, we did see some of those in the scan. So of those, I guess, 106 maximum residential short-term rentals that we found during the reference year, we did find listings with pictures that looked like a carriage home or a cottage house, or however they're defined in your bylaws here. Yeah. Yeah. And those would not be currently allowed under your current bed and breakfast regulations. So yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just had a couple of comments and one question. One comment to add to what you were saying when you refer to that gold standard, Vancouver, what they brought in, et cetera. I do recall reading that when that took place, that following up rents, the average rent price had dropped, and it was actually quite considerable. The amount that rents had gone down. So that was encouraging to read, but you've added that in though. So thank you. One question I have, just to clarify for everyone here, at what point is a rental considered to be long-term? I think that, people have an understanding, but just to clarify that, what is the minimum amount, if you like, that is long-term? Because my understanding is it doesn't have to be full-time all year long. So that's a question that I have.
Sure. Yeah. So the BC government has upped the common definition now to this 90-day standard. It used to be 30 days, kind of during the first wave of local regulations. I think appropriately now that's up to 90. So anything 90 days or under is considered short-term rental. Beyond that would start to become considered long-term rental. But in the absence of an actual tenancy agreement, then it's gray zone and you have to kind of look at the very specifics of the case.
Follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you. And I just wanted to follow up with a comment linked to something that Councillor Grenz brought forward, and that is around mortgage helpers. And that I understand, and people often think about short-term rentals as being mortgage helpers. And the same actually can be true of long-term rental, of course, that those also do help people pay their mortgages. I could think of two people in my neighborhood who one of them says, well, no, even if they thought about moving, they can't, because in fact, the rental, that suite that they have really helps them with their mortgage payments. So they're pretty comfortable where they are. And another one in my neighborhood who used to do a short-term rental, but after a while actually found that quite tiring and does a long-term rental now. So that does help people as well.
Thank you. And my own comment, great presentation, guys. I'm very impressed. The housing and tourism portfolios have kind of overlapped each other now. And so what has now become housing in this current crisis we're in, this housing crisis, is wasn't considered housing before. And I'm speaking mostly for people that are living in RVs. So people are living in RVs throughout our community, throughout Canada and so forth, and that's just due to usually the high cost of housing. But at the same time, that's going to have an impact on your tourism in some regards, because now the campgrounds and so forth have discovered that this is a form of housing for some people. And so instead of having a family coming out and going camping for a week or maybe 2 weeks type of thing, now they have people within RVs that are moving in, and they will stay long-term. Actually, they'll move in and be there continuous, far in exceeding the 90 days, as you mentioned already, Eric. So has there been any study by the tourism, your association, Blaine, so to speak, about the impact of that? Because I know locally here, we see the campgrounds in town that are not able to take many campers during the summertime, to take that, puts extra pressure on, of course, our provincial campsites. But at the same time, I believe it would have an impact on those people that are campers, not having availability of extra camping spots.
Do you have anything to say about RVs? I can
Briefly, and then I'll over to you. What we tend to see and recommend in local regulations is to keep residential short-term rentals in dwelling units just distinct from RVs and even park model units in some cases, just because they are different things and should be and often are kind of regulated differently. But over to Blaine. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges with talking about like campsites and RV units in this context is that we don't have as many data points on our RVs as we do with accommodations, and they're not taxed in the same way that accommodations are. So it's really hard, and there's not like a third-party data scraping service like what we were able to access to be able to publish this report. So although we know that there are people who are living in RVs in commercial RV parks within the city, that technically they shouldn't be staying there more than 180 days, there's really no elegant way of measuring that,
Right.
at least currently. I would hope that maybe that would be one of the next steps that the province looks at as part of trying to get a better picture of how housing is being affected. They've tackled short-term rentals now, hopefully like RV related will be. But I know that local governments are struggling with this now too. Regional district is as well. And so I'm sorry, I don't really have a great answer other than to share that data shortage aspect.
It's a pending crisis.
Yeah.
One more, just add to our list, right? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And that is important. And you mentioned the 180-day rule is very difficult to enforce. And so it's virtually impossible, because we don't have people just counting people how long they stay. So it sounds good on policy, but it's not so good as enforcement goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that reply. Any further questions for the delegations at this time? I'll say thank you very much for your presentation, and we look forward to hearing more from the Tourism Association and you too, Eric, to further up with the latest data as it comes in. Thank you. So thank you for that, Council. And we're moving on now to reports. We have what's known as a new feature this year. It's used in other councils as well. It's the Mayor Midterm Report. And so what I can suggest is you have in your agenda packages, if you picked one up at the door type of thing, you have in the agenda, the midterm report anyways, as I'm going to briefly try and go through as much as I can, but I have it written down because I have a tendency to forget things that are simply too many to mention. But so I'm going to try and do that. So I'm going to read this out in kind of bullet form if I can, and a little bit of maybe some color slides to accompany me as I'm going along. So on November 7th, 2022, we took the oath of office and pledged to serve our community. As I reflect on the privilege that holding elected office brings, I'm very proud of the work we have done to improve the quality of life for Parksville residents, business owners, and visitors. I'm honored to serve as mayor to this council and very grateful for the respectful way this council debates important issues and collaboratively solves complex challenges, such as balancing the tax burden with maintaining critical infrastructure and ensuring we build a solid foundation for Parksville's future. Basically, at the start of our term, we have a strategic plan. So shortly after taking office, we spent several days caucusing to determine our strategic plan. This plan is a commitment to carry out our roles in a respectful and considerate manner, make thoughtful decisions, and proactively engage with the community and be clear and transparent in our communications. Basically what it is it's focus on things we can improve on type of thing and keep within our lane. And we decide that right at the start of our term. And so it stops us from wandering into the weeds and stay focused anyways as to what we as a council have decided together. So the strategic plan guides our priorities and investment decisions. So number one was advocacy. Number two was the official community plan review and update. Number three was a vibrant and livable downtown. Number four is community engagement. Number five, water use planning and management. And number six, investment in recreation amenities. So the advocacy has played a big role. That was number one on our strat plan. And so the advocacy has played a pivotal role in many things that we've done through our first 2 years in office here. It's listed in the full report. I won't go into all the many details. There's one or two things that have come up, and it was just very timely to the presentation we just had. I'm particularly proud of the successful advocacy regarding to the province, regarding the reconsideration of the short-term rental regulations as applicable to the Parksville Resort Drive area. So what we were able to ensure was we got an exemption from the STR rules that were put in place by the province, and we were able to maintain Resort Drive as a short-term rental area special accommodation. Furthermore, the city has advocated also through the presence on our RDN board As an example, the RDN board, including myself and Councillor Wood, has advocated for much needed healthcare facilities that serve our community, such as the new cancer care clinic, the cardio cath lab at the Nanaimo Regional General Hospital. You'll be hearing more about that. You've heard the announcements from the province and so forth that they're listening, they've heard, but it's through the strong advocacy from this group working through the RDN to make this happen at much needed improvements in NRGH, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. And so moving on, we have the, after many years of discussion and advocacy, we have engaged with the Ministry of Transportation to something that's happening right now regarding the reconstruction of the portion of the highway between Resort Drive and the Orange Bridge, resulting in a safer traffic flow and safer active transportation route in that area. You've seen how difficult it is for families and tourists alike, you know, traveling from the Resort Drive to come into Parksville, to go down that narrow strip of highway or down Plummer Road safely. And it was death-defying and actually heart in your mouth occasions, always when the families are trying to get into Parksville and on a very fast highway. So what's happening is Moti have agreed. They've done the first phase anyway. So if you're seeing up by the log cabin, they've rerouted the entrance into Rouse Trevor. And what's coming in the phase 2, it's going to be next spring, 2025. It will be completed for summer, will be the rest of the active transportation plan, linking parallel along with Plummer Road, going right to the Orange Bridge. So providing our tourists and visitors and our residents as well, safe transportation method to get from Resort Drive all the way into the Parksville area using the Orange Bridge. So that was a major achievement, and I was very pleased. After at least 20 years of advocating, we finally made it happen. So then we have our vibrant and livable downtown. So working closely with the Parksville Downtown Business Association, we have successfully activated the Memorial Plaza with dozens of community events throughout the summer months. We co-hosted 4 Dance With Me events, attracting hundreds of people of all ages, adding vibrancy and fun to this newly created space. We're very pleased with how that turns out, and it will continue to evolve as we work with we have a new staff member that's actually an event planner and so forth, and she has been instrumental in making sure that we have many events throughout the city and park. So we also have the water use planning and management, which I'm probably most proud of, the investment to our critical drinking water services. I recently signed the phase 1 contract with Kerwood Lydell to initiate the most comprehensive review of the city's drinking water assets to date. This important work will provide factual information on the state of our current drinking water assets and offer guidance to council on future storage and water provision needs for a growing community with resiliency and climate change implications in mind. There's a further detail that will be coming out as a news release anyways in the next few days that actually goes further detail in what that water comprehensive study is going to look like. Moving on from there, we have investment in recreation amenities. We're proud to lead the investment in recreation assets in our city. The community park is our true gem. The gathering place has been completed. The boardwalk is being renewed. Sports courts and the skate park were repaired, repainted. The new accessible washrooms have been built, and many new pedestrian connections link all of these great amenities to enhance safety and connectivity to the park. The natural setting is second to none, and it gives us great satisfaction to see the improvements that have been made during our term. As an added bonus, much more of the investment has been supplemented by significant grant funding, and we have more to follow. We've already had meetings with the pickleball associations and basketball and so forth, so more to follow in 25 and 26. As liaison to the Beach Fest Society, we were able to approve, design, and develop the outdoor theater, the performing arts theater in our community park, which has been especially exciting to us to have several fantastic music events at this wonderful stage this past summer. That's with a strong partnership with our colleagues at Beach Fest has made this project a tremendous success with relatively low operating costs for Parksville taxpayers, which is a definite win-win in my opinion. And so we go here. I'm getting there, folks. The results of the Transportation Master Plan, which has been underway anyways for the fall of 24, will be released to council shortly, and we'll be exploring options for pilot projects and ideas to slow down traffic through the core and make the downtown streets safer, more inviting, and more vibrant. Our vision is to create a Parksville downtown as a destination rather than a drive-through. We've already implemented some changes, allowing lights to remain up year-round in key areas and working with the PWA to light up the plaza as well. We'll be advocating for this through the business improvement area over the next few years. We've also been engaging with pickleball enthusiasts and all the elected club presidents of all the pickleballers in our area, which seems to be quite a few. We'll be working with them anyways to find acceptable solutions to increase accommodating this growing sport in our region. And that's it for pickleball. At this particular point, this is just a brief bullet points of what we've done. There's more in the agenda package. I would like to acknowledge the assistance of staff of both the City of Parksville and the Regional District of Nanaimo. Their knowledge and experience is invaluable as we seek policy solutions to complex issues. To our partners in collaboration at the provincial government level, I'm encouraged by the dialogue that we have furthered our relationship by working together, creating solutions for the pressing crises and competing priorities: housing, doctors, water, environment, recreation, and homeliness. Safe, secure, thriving communities. Together, we have achieved monumental visionary solutions. We are right on track creating success stories, but we can always do better. And my express thanks at this time to this council with their vision and their collaboration and the wonderful, respectful way that we can all get together to get things done. But a special hats off to our staff here at the City of Parksville that have been instrumental in helping us achieve our vision. And we have asked an awful lot of our staff, and they have never let us down. And I'm so pleased, anyways, to be a part of this amazing organization. So thank you, staff. That's it for me. So I would like a mover to seconder for a recommendation that the report from the mayor's midterm report be received. Councillor Wood, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Gore. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Wood.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, for putting this forward. It's kind of like a State of the Union address, halfway through the term. I said this on some podcast last week that I really appreciate sitting at the table and listening to all of the opinions and recommendations from other council members, including yourself, Mayor, of course, because I think that's that's the way you get to a good decision, is just respectful discussion. And so I appreciate all the members of council, of course, all of staff as we get halfway through this term, and of course to yourself, Mayor. Mayor is not an easy job, and a lot of the time, most of the time, you make it look quite easy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wood, for that. And Councillor Gore, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I want to echo your comments to thank the staff, but I also want to recognize the works done by the previous council. This has been some of the works that were mentioned were continuity of the work that was initiated and partly done by the previous council. So I want to recognize that. Also, big thanks to volunteers. Some of them are in the gallery today. We have lots of volunteers in this community of ours, which make projects like this and other council initiatives come to fruition. My takeaway from these 2 years of these being new to council, my learning has been 2 words stand out: collaboration and teamwork. So without that, I don't think anything can be achieved. And this has been truly a wonderful 2 years. And I look forward to another 2 years and perhaps more in the future. We'll see in serving our community. So thank you again.
Councillor Gore, thank you. Councillor Veal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I have a couple of comments, and they have been already mentioned here, but I really want to acknowledge the heavy lifting that gets done by staff in order for anything to move forward. And certainly that was true, well, with any number of things, but I think about the installation of the Moby mats and all the work that went on behind the scenes. I would actually like to particularly acknowledge Councillor Gore and his role as liaison to the Accessibility Committee as well. It was really gratifying, as you have mentioned, to be there on that day, and it was actually a dry day, sunshine, no rain. It was great. Certainly something to be, a moment to be proud of. And also, as Councillor Gore has mentioned, the work of previous councils, getting to that outdoor theater took more than a few years. And I think back to a previous CAO who I did work with for some time, Fred was his name, and he reminded me that things get done at city council. It's much like a freighter on the ocean. It's not like a little speedboat. You don't make those turns too quickly. So anyway, thanks to everyone who works together around this table. And again, to staff who do the bulk of the work behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councilor Beal, and I'll get to you in a second, Councilor Martin. I found the one page where you talked about, I thought I was supposed to talk about the Moby mats. And here it is on the back of the other page. I'll just touch on the 4 points that were on here too about the Moby mat installation. Was one of the most exciting accomplishments of our term and has brought the addition of the Moby mats to our community park. So thank you for that reminder, Councilor Beal. I didn't want to let this get by, and it was an amazing accomplishment. Also, an amazing accomplishment by this council was the completion of the approval for constructing the Oceanside track at Bolinas. And so that is well underway. And as an update, everyone, this council was the one that pushed that over the edge, over the finish line, I guess we did. And so I'm so proud of how this council, at maximum collaboration with all the other groups in this area, made this happen. And that's another project that's been on the map for a long time. We also have an environmental partnership with the Nature Trust along the estuary and the Englishman River, whereby we're creating a pathway from the community park, the Parksville Community Park, all the way to the basically Shelley Road or the Englishman River that is going to be adjacent to the Nature Trail, and Nature Trust area there at the estuary. And that'll be also another active and safe transportation route for people to get to our community park and back out to the river on the other side. And we also have the affordable housing partnerships that we've created anyways with different organizations. And that's what made me realize that I forgot one last page here. My hat's off to the Lions Housing Society. I may see a couple of yellow vests in the audience right now that have been instrumental in creating successful affordable housing projects in the city of Parksville, creating amazing housing. It's really well-managed housing as well as affordable housing for the many people in our community. And I appreciate your efforts on all that you've accomplished so far and look forward to working with achieving even more affordable housing for our people. So thank you to the Lions Society for that. So there's the page I forgot. Thank you so much. And Councilor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just think there's a lot of people feeling grateful. It's maybe because it's the end of the year and you've initiated this report. So I just wanted to say thank you very much. And also working with the council here, because we all have different points of view, obviously. And we do work and the track for me, like it was huge and I was really wanting it. And I'm so glad that we were able to do that. So there's many things that we've done. And thank you again for doing this. It's just a sort of a summation halfway through. So thank you again.
Thanks to everyone. Thank you. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you so much. Next, we have reports. We have the Assistant Fire Chief regarding the Confined Spaces Rescue Services Agreement with the Regional District of Nanaimo for the Confined Space Rescue Services Agreement. We don't have a presentation so council, that background information was in your package. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that the report from the Assistant Fire Chief dated December 9th, 2024, entitled Confined Space Rescue Services Agreement with the Regional District of Nanaimo be received? And 2, that the Confined Space Rescue Services Agreement between the Parksville Fire Department and the Regional District of Nanaimo regarding the provisions of confined space rescue be approved. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That is unanimous. Next, we have the Director of Community Planning and Building regarding reissuance of a development permit, 155 Hearst Avenue, to consider reissuance of a development permit. Do I have mover or seconder for the recommendation as noted? Moved by Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Wood. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Carries unanimous. Now we have, I believe, Mr. Russell is going to do the Director of Community Planning and Building will do an interim housing needs reports. Mr. Russell, are you going to be there? Are you coming up the podium or are you there? Thank you. Right. Before or after? Before. I've been asked for a quick 5-minute comfort break. If I could take a 5-minute break. Sorry, Mr. Russell. If we could just take a quick break at this point. Thank you. Good afternoon. We're back. Thank you so much, Mr. Russell. Carry on, sir.
If I may, Mayor and Council, this is an overview of the Parksville Interim Housing Needs Report. This is a summary essentially, or covering what's in the agenda package. So I'm going to blitz through some of these slides because they are in the agenda package. And I apologize for the color on my monitor. It looked a little higher contrast than this. So we are required to adopt, or sorry, receive an interim housing needs report by January 1st, 2025. This is part of legislative changes initiated by the province in order to facilitate and address housing needs. And I'm calling this a UPPI, or Unplanned Provincial Initiative. So it wasn't part of our original work program. And so as part of this, the study, the report uses provincial methodology to establish the anticipated housing needs for the next 5 and 20 years. And it's based on the 2021 census, as well as parts of it based on the 2006 census. And we are required to do a complete full housing needs report by December 1st, 2028. So this is an interim step, and then a full complete rewrite of the housing needs report will be required before the end of 2028. The provincial criteria covers a number of things. So there's basically sections E through F that are required. It looks at housing for an extreme core need, as well as for individuals experiencing homelessness. It deals with what's called I can't say the word, suppressed households. And as well as anticipated housing growth, number of housing units required to increase the rental vacancy rate, and then the overall number of housing units needed for the next 5 and 20 years, the total demand. So this graph doesn't really show a lot, but just shows that, yes, the population is growing, and both in renters and owners. This is the average, what's called extreme core housing need. So extreme core housing need is where folks are spending more than 50% of their pre-tax household income on housing. So in the case of owners with mortgages, it's 1.12% in Parksville. In the case of renters, it's 11.9%. And I should say that's different than we sort of have an attainable affordable number in our DCC waiver provisions, which is based on a 30% criteria, not this more extreme 50%. So this is the number of anticipated new housing units that would be required to meet this core housing need. So folks that are in more desperate need of housing. So over the 20-year horizon, it'd be 272 units. Over the 5-year horizon, it would be 68 units. And then this is for persons experiencing homelessness. So to improve that situation, over the next 20 years, 80 dwelling units would be necessary. And over the next 5 years, 40 dwelling units would be necessary. And then suppressed household formation. So these are persons that want to form a household. So it would tend to be a younger demographic for whatever reason, are living with family or sharing a house because they're not able to enter the housing market. And this table here shows a comparison between owners and renters based on the demographic age group that folks lie in. So we can see that on the higher number of years, and that there's a higher percentage of owners compared to to younger folks on the graph. Although I will say in Parksville, you can see that obviously the demographic, the total number of folks is also in Parksville shifted as well to the higher number of years. And this is just more of the same based on this case, the 2021 numbers.
I'll let it wait till the end. Sorry, Gary.
And this is some complicated calculation that's used to figure out what the age categories are. That then builds into another exciting table that determines what percentage of folks are owners or renters depending on the demographic profile they fit into. And this is some more of that exciting stuff. And then I like graphs. So so I think this graph again shows you just the difference in home ownership versus renters in the different age categories in the city. And we can see that folks between say 25 and 44 years are more in that renter category, where it starts shifting at around 35 to becoming where ownership becomes more predominant. So this is suppressed households. So these are the number of housing units that would be needed to address those folks that would like to have housing that for whatever reason are not able to have housing. So they're younger folks living with their family. So over the next 20 years to address that need, we would need 290 dwelling units. Over the next 5 years, we would need 72. So part of the growth calculations are based on the regional district growth that factors in on the number of people moving to Parksville. And so it adjusts some of the later numbers that we'll see. And so this is the anticipated household growth calculations. And I'm going to skip this one because it sort of helps build into the math for some later on categories. We do need a number of dwelling units to adjust for our rental vacancy rate. This is using the provincial method. So based on this provincial method, to increase our rental vacancy rate to 20 years, we need 19 dwelling units. And over the next 5 years to achieve a 3% rental vacancy rate, we need 5 dwelling units. I'm not super comfortable with this number, just for the record. I think we need, I think this understates that because it's sort of based on a 2% local vacancy rate. And we've often been below 2%. So I think this number may need to be slightly higher, but I'm going off the provincial method for this. And all this stuff ends up with some more math for additional local housing demand, which ultimately works into the total number of housing units required to fill those prior different groups for the 5 and 20-year term. So for 5 years, 1,064 dwelling units are required. And for 20 years, 3,604 would be required based on the provincial method. And this is just a graph of showing what those different categories are and the total number of 5 and 20 year. And then the other part of the interim housing needs report is it needs to address housing proximity with respect to transportation infrastructure. So in the report, it highlights that our current OCP has a number of policies that promote sustainable transportation, including public transit, walking, biking, and other forms of active transportation near housing. It also encourages development in around the downtown and other select nodes within the city, aspects that can promote passive transportation, creating more opportunities for walking, cycling, and everyday tasks. And then it is also noted that as part of council's stated priorities in the 2023 to 2026 strategic plan is to review and update the city's official community plan. And it's anticipated that this will look at the relationship between transportation and housing, and that it'll be reviewed as part of that to review and update. And my understanding is that's been budgeted for 2025 and the 2026 fiscal calendar. And then the other is action to reduce housing. And so over the last few years, so this is based on when the initial housing needs report was received by council, which was March 21st, 2022. So since that time, We've had zoning amendments for 423 dwelling units, of which 350 are under active construction or have been built. The zoning bylaw was amended to address the small-scale multi-unit housing initiative from the province. Development permits have been issued. These are things where the zoning was already in place before that timeline for 467 dwelling units. Of those, 71 have been built. And then we also have had a number of building permits issued that have facilitated the construction of 797 dwelling units. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Russell. Questions for Mr. Russell from council? Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would thank you, Mr. Russell, for this very comprehensive work you've done here. It gives us a lot to digest, actually, as to where we're going, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much for this well-done report. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Gore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Director Russell, for this report. I'll start with a basic question here. The previous report that was published in 2021 was produced by the RDN. I'm just cognizant of your time and how the province is giving all these, unplanned initiatives, as you mentioned. Why was this put on the city to take on this report this time? Sorry, rather than a regional approach like we have for the RGS.
Go ahead, Ms. Russell.
I can only speak for myself because obviously this was a staff initiative in response to the provincial requirements. I sometimes find that to sort of work through the numbers yourself, you get a better sense of the numbers. And with us going into an official community plan review in the near future, it was important for us to have a good understanding of what numbers, what the sort of numbers are, as well as it sort of got us looking at other data that we will need for that review. And so doing that on a regional basis just didn't seem to sort of tie in with that OCP review that we'll be doing in the near future. So it was really, I guess you could say, to get more familiar with the numbers.
Follow-up, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just going back to the regional growth strategy, which we as Parksville form part of, I'm hoping the results of this will be shared with the RDN so that we can look at this housing needs from a regional perspective. So as advocacy, our strategic goal, we can talk to our partners in Oceanside, Qualicum Beach, and the electoral areas. So they are doing their part in meeting the housing need rather than everything falling on Parksville's shoulders. Will this be shared with the RDN?
If I may, through to Councillor Gore, it'll be shared both with the RDN as well as the general public. So it is required to be posted on the city's webpage and available for the public.
That's okay. Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Russell. Just so much information here that I don't know if I've processed it all, but I will try. And the timing was great with our short-term rental presentation earlier today. And one thing that I noted there is that Eric, when he presented, he referred to 1820. So 1,820 was the number of, I think it was dwelling units that were needed. And it looks like here we're coming up with 1,064. Anyway, the information that was presented earlier today, does that seem to jive with what you have found with this interim housing report?
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Beale, I would have to look at the specific time frame that Eric was using to confirm that 100%. I did look at the population growth statistics that I keep, and the numbers, the provincial numbers, do fall reasonably within what I would estimate for our housing needs.
Follow-up, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And going back to, I know here, looking at, thank you very much as well for clarifying the definition of extreme core housing need and also suppressed. I did understand suppressed, and it was what I thought, but I didn't understand that extreme core housing need was situations where individuals are paying more greater than 50% of their income. But looking at that number, it seems that within 5 years, there is a need for 68 units to address that extreme core housing need, and also 40 units to reduce homelessness in the area. So I presume that then one would need to add those numbers together in order to address those. Like one is not a subset of the other. Is that correct?
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Beal, that is correct. They're added together. Yeah.
Good. Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you. And thank you very much for that final information about the number of, the development permits that are out there that applied for. Are there additional, because there's certainly still building going on, certainly at the corner of Alberni and Despard, Rowan, and nearby here at Thrifty's, over here on Jensen, and still on McMillan. Are you aware of additional applications that are coming in beyond those?
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Beal. So there are applications in addition to what is presented. The criteria used were essentially what items has council approved, and of those items that council has approved, what stage are they at? And then in the case of building permits, things that are actually built or are underway. So applications that haven't been presented to council yet, or where a final decision has not been made, are not included in the numbers.
Final? Okay, I'm counting.
Thank you very much. And thinking about those developments that are either in progress or coming up for approval, but even then there isn't necessarily a guarantee that they would, for instance, address the extreme core housing need or homelessness or so that although the numbers might be there, we don't necessarily know that they would address the more critical needs for lower cost housing, correct?
Mayor, if I may through to Councillor Beal, I think it's going to depend on the specifics of the application. So there may be the odd application that does address components of that, but typically market applications are less likely to do that, or less likely to do that as a whole component, but there might be small components of them.
Final. Councillor Grants, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to our Director of Planning and Building for this report. It's very timely as well with all the things we're talking about. I guess I have several questions. I'm trying to put them into a coherent line of questioning. So first of all, I love getting data. It's very helpful for us to just generally as a society to know what to do. Although I do wonder whether this data is how helpful it is, because it doesn't contemplate, like we just had a presentation about short-term rentals impact, but there are all kinds of other things going on in society, like household formation is reduced historically, where people are not marrying as quickly, and then they're divorcing more quickly, and so we have the need for more houses because people don't cohabitate as much as they may have in previous eras. Then we throw in what kind of demographics we're moving into our area, which are they from other cultural backgrounds where they tend to live in larger family units and then don't need as many housing units, but have more people. And so there's just so many complicating factors, I think, to all this, which I guess dovetails into my first question is what next? Is the province going to be aggregating this and making the data public? And can we then see how we stand relative to other communities for this? And then what steps should we take as a council to address what comes up from this? And then the final question, maybe I have been able to put this into a package of questions, hopefully you can follow my thread, is when we look at specific types of housing, who should we task with bringing that housing online? And how do we do that? How do we facilitate that? I mean, all we have here is zoning and maybe some advocacy. And so I'm just curious what you see us as doing to bring about the kind of community that we want to see here.
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Grenz.
In 3 sentences or less, please.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the comparison of data goes, every local government is required to publish the data in a form that's accessible. So anyone will be able to compare the different housing needs and trends at their leisure. They could also go to the UBC's HEART website, where a lot of this, the sort of heavy lifting on the data was assembled. As well as, you know, your typical sources like Stats Canada, but absolutely someone can do comparisons, and I'm sure folks will. As to you know, the government's the answer to some things, but it's not the entire answer. We have some limited tools. We don't own, in many cases, we don't own land. We basically essentially put stop signs or speed limit signs on things. We can put a regulation that stops something from happening. We can put a directional arrow that says we'd like this to happen. We can set a speed limit that, you know, establishes how much of something can happen. So most normally, or not normally, but just generally, a lot of housing is really done by the private sector. And so the tools that we have can steer the private sector. They can get out of the way of the private sector. They can, the city can utilize its resources to do partnerships, but that is utilizing scarce resources to do those partnerships. And, you know, for example, a municipality could run a housing corporation if that's something that it wanted to put resources to. A small community like Parksville, I believe, would be better served by partnering with agencies that are already in that business. We're not in the housing business. Big cities like Toronto are in the housing business, and when sometimes when government's directly involved in that business, I would say their success is maybe not as great as when some other organizations are providing that service. So. And I believe, was there another question or?
Go ahead, CAO Kaler.
Thank you. Whoops. Just want to maybe add to that, because the city does have some good resources online. So maybe a bit of a plug for anyone that's interested in developing in the city of Parksville. We do have a number of existing policies that council has approved that support affordable housing units by waiving DCCs, so that development cost charges, to make those units more affordable. We also have density bonus, so that in certain cases, as a developer, you can build more units if some of them are affordable. We also have a policy where we waive a lot of the application fees. Building permit fees can be quite extensive in some cases. And we also prioritize those applications over others. So already this council and previous councils have done a lot of what we can do at our level to incentivize those kind of non-market housing. We also have given land, as was mentioned by the director, for supportive housing. So we have over 50 units of supportive housing on city property, and many more units that were supported by those various DCC waivers and cost offsetting models that the city has. And we also are working with partner agencies, as I think council is well aware, to look at using a cheaper version of property, which is city owned, for those other kinds of housing. So I think kudos to Blaine for actually bringing in a lot of those things, because over the years that he's been here, he has advocated to various councils to get ahead of that. So for a small city, we're kind of unique that we have that. And we've also had carriage houses and suites in single family homes well before other communities our size. So I just don't want to miss the fact that we've done a lot of what is available to us at that level. as a local government level. And in the other provinces, there's different local government rules. So we're always open to ideas from the like building associations or community groups on what more we could be doing. But right now when we go to these seminars at our training in Pro-D, it's like, oh, do this, this, and this. And I'm sitting there often going, already done. So it would be great to have some new ideas other than just regurgitating Stats Canada information, which is what we're kind of required to do at this point. But it is useful as a touch point as to, numbers of where we're at and what the growth rate will kind of expect us to build. But really all we can do is put up the sign that we're open and welcoming and want those folks to come and build here as opposed to Victoria or somewhere else. But I just didn't want Blaine to not toot his own horn because he won't do that. But we've got a lot of things in place that are very beneficial to folks interested in building here.
Follow up, Councillor Grant.
Thank you. If I may follow up. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. And I think that, I just came back from Ottawa and was speaking with lots of municipal leaders from across the country. And I think we can be very proud of the things that are in place here in Parksville. I guess my questions were more sort of at a provincial level, because I feel like we are doing the things in Parksville. And the next step for us is and what we have been doing, including when the Minister of Housing was here recently, is advocating for the things the province needs to be doing in order to support the fact that we are doing the things that they appear to have as their mandate. And so so any I guess to tie this up, anything that from a staff level that you can provide to council as we advocate around what we are doing effectively and what we now ask of the province, that's where we're really trying to push, and the mayor was doing that. We've all been doing that in our various places we've been going. Is Parksville's doing it now? We need doctors. We need support for our water infrastructure. We need all these other things. Our numbers show it that we're doing it. So give us what we need.
Yes, and thank you for that, Councillor Granson, which reflects back on zoning. Zoning is one of those big directional signs that we give to the potential developers, which, in the back of my mind, I touched on it briefly here. Zoning could be the answer to creating proper recreation RV living by converting zoning to existing areas that are at substantially less than, say, this average city of Parksville property cost. I'm suggesting perhaps in electoral districts around us in the RDN. And zoning could change that to create proper RV housing. And I'm working on something right now with the RDN, which I want to bring to you guys to maybe address this latest crisis that has been identified. We, as Kiva had mentioned, with our planning department, was very ahead of it with the carriage houses. And we've had a huge uptick on carriage houses. They're everywhere in this town. It's great. And we'll talk about mortgage helpers. There's a perfect mortgage helper right there. And we continue to see that. And the other small lot subdivisions are now, getting a lot of buy-in from the developers, of course, which once again creates a more affordable housing on a smaller lot. Obviously, if we can get 4 houses where one was, that is going to be more affordable. So we're definitely ahead of the game on that, but there's a couple other ones that we have to look at. And I think zoning is going to be the way we do it. We can't control market, like many of the large buildings that go up with 4-story or whatever. The market will determine when that occupancy certificate is done, whether that's going to be rental or market sale, like as in condo. So, and it's totally the market, and the market depends a lot on the Bank of Canada rate, which way they're going to go. And also they're looking at our vacancy rate as well to see, to make sure the market's not oversaturated. They're the ones that are going to tell us that we've got enough rentals, because they'll stop building them because there's too much of a vacancy rate. A vacancy rate for a developer is not a good thing. So that's been controlled by market, and I think the free market is how we decide how many we need. But I think we can do some more improved zoning to capture this latest housing that is perhaps falling through the cracks, and we can better control it and provide housing for everybody, which I think is our responsibility. So more to follow. Thank you. Anybody else questions for Mr. Russell or comments? Thank you very much. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation as noted in the agenda? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wood. Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you. Next, under reports, we have from Director of Operations, the sidewalk snow clearing pilot project. I'll read this one out if I could ask for a mover or seconder for the following. That the memo from the Director of Operations dated December 4th, 2024, entitled Sidewalk Snow Clearing Pilot Project be received. And that point 2, that Council endorse the temporary amendment to the Snow and Ice Policy 8.10 to include a pilot project that increases the level of service and prioritizes clearing of designated walkways in the downtown core and the secondary clearing of sidewalks adjacent to city parks and facilities where sufficient staff capacity exists and access to equipment is available. Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you, Council. That was a very important one. Thank you. Director of Finance for the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. You might have heard of it, Council. We've talked about it for the last 4 months continuously. Thank you to Jetta, the amazing staff, to provide Council with the 2025-2029 final financial plan bylaw. Do I move or seconder for the recommendation as noted? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Grens. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Carries unanimous. Thank you. From our CAO has prepared a public waste receptacle policy to request council approval of a policy for placement of public waste receptacles within the city. You've got that in your package. Move or second for the recommendation.
Can we break them out?
Sorry.
Can we break them out?
The 2 recommendations? Yeah, absolutely. Mover and seconder for the first recommendation that the report from the Chief Administration Officer dated December 4th, 2024, entitled Public Waste Receptacle Policy be received. Moved by Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Gore. Any discussion? All those in favor? It carries. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Number 2, that public waste receptacle policy number 8.25 as attached to the December 4th, 2024 report from the Chief Administration Officer be approved and the corporate policy manual be updated accordingly. The mover and seconder, moved by Councillor Gore, seconded by Councillor Martin. Comments? Councillor Gore, you moved. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Fraz. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. Through the Mayor Council, I don't know if anyone else has any comments on this, but reading through this policy, there's a couple concerns for me that popped up, and I think that council should consider. This, as the background states, goes back a couple of years. Garbage cans in the community definitely are a popular request that comes up, and it's saying here that this is being brought forward because these requests are coming to council more so than they're going to staff. So they put out a policy here kind of directing how they will now administer and proceed with these requests and how they'll prioritize it. Concerns I have is that looking through this policy, it prioritizes the ease of staff's access and utilizing the garbages more than it does the community's needs out of it. One thing I don't think it really is complete on the background is here. In 2021, when this first came up, we started looking at, where garbage cans were. A question came up as to how many garbage cans we have in the downtown, where are they? And that request was kind of pushed down the line under the fact that we were updating our GIS and bringing all the information onto GIS. So it'd be easier if we just waited to see when those kind of are on there. And then by the time council went to review all the staff workloads like we've done before, of course, that's not a high priority item. So it kind of got pushed off the list. So it never really got addressed rather than it being a staffing level as far as clearing out garbage cans where we put them. I just don't think it was really completely looked at. So we still haven't seen how many we have in the downtown or where they are. I do agree with the policy kind of addressing things like it shouldn't be in, neighborhoods that are just residential or out by postal boxes or, places that people might just come dump their household garbage. But where the garbage cans are in the downtown really drives businesses. It drives the walkability where people go and frequent. There's things like if you're taking your dog for a walk, if the dog's, having to dispose of its waste, that's going to help guide which streets you're going to go down. Or, if you're taking your children out and you're having to deal with their lunches or foods, things I know for myself. And what we see here is there's a large concentration. It's very saturated with garbage cans from Rod and Gun down to Chevron. I think I'd be willing to bet, without having seen how many we have in the community and where they are, that well over half or 3/4 of them are on that street alone. And then there's very few elsewhere in the community. They're just kind of scattered about. So I think that this policy should be looking more at the user of the garbage cans rather than the staff's ease with dealing with them. Although that is important because there are factors like how they go down into the ground. So it's not just as easy as taking out the garbage bag like you would at home. They need equipment to access and dump these receptacles. So there is a level that they need to be able to access them, and of course how they impede traffic and that. But there's lots of places where staff can do that, and the community would, I think, be better served out of it. So there's that level that I think this policy needs to address. This type of thing, garbage cans, it's not as like big and flashy that you might like see in the mayor's report, even though, it is one of those things that it affects everyone's community, like their enjoyment, their day-to-day enjoyment of where we live. So I think it is like really, it's one of our core functions that we do, right? The dealing with the water, the garbage and so on. So I think it is very important. And that's why you're seeing people get frustrated and bringing the request to council now and kind of fed up with not getting their requests heard because it's not serving their needs of where they want them to be. And so those are the concerns that I have here. I want to share with you. I'd like to hear from the rest of council, perhaps if you guys, if that it feels like it resonates with you. And then I can speak more to it if there's more needs to be said.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Frass. I know that the staff have looked at this, with a certain amount of, like usage, obviously they have that data anyways to how much they're being used. And also there's a bit of a tendency now to, we mentioned particularly dog waste bags. That is an issue anyways. And a lot of the municipalities are following through that. It's your responsibility as a dog owner to, if you use a dog waste bag, hopefully you do, if it happens out in the public area type of thing, that you actually, if you bring your dog out, you take the waste home with you and dispose of it in your own waste receptacles, because it's just the better way of going, rather than creating service level for those areas that the people should be using their own garbage. Anyhow, I know that I'll go to CEO Kaler in a second here. See if I can ask CEO Kaler, of the options here anyways, you're providing the public waste receptacle policy here. What kind of study or what kind of analysis did you use to come up with what you've advised, as far as usage goes, as Councillor Frass has mentioned? How have you determined locations and so forth?
Thank you, if I may, through you to council. So this is really addressing a service level that we have in place. And so it wouldn't preclude a member of the community or a group or several people in a neighborhood asking for a new garbage can or a relocated garbage can. It just basically puts that decision at the staff level, where the director of operations can look at whether that can be accommodated within the existing number of people that we have who can monitor and service those cans. So we still would be able to respond to a request if somebody wanted to move one from another location, or even add a new one if it was on a route where we could accommodate it within our existing staff level. So what we were trying to do is take it out of, I guess, a political level and base it on technical. So if it means that we have really two people who do our garbage can maintenance, and so if you add a garbage can somewhere else that's not on their existing route, there is a certain threshold where that means we need another person, or we need to add overtime hours for somebody to go out of their way. And so we aren't getting as many as we used to. Councillor Frass is absolutely right. There was a flurry of concern around certain areas a few years back. We aren't really seeing that right now, but our new manager of parks has had some really good ideas about even temporary, like seasonally moving things out of areas where in the community park, it's a peak during the summertime, but it might move to a different area in the shoulder or off peak. So at a staff level, we would have some flexibility to kind of focus on the areas that are busy at certain times. So overall, the number of garbage cans might be the same, but we would either decommission some for the season so that they wear and tear on them is less and staff don't have to maintain those ones, like in the depths of winter where there's not as many people perhaps at a certain area of the community park. But from our perspective, it really is just, it's not my expertise or my experience that feeds into that. It's really the staff, the two staff who do the work and their immediate supervisor that should be in a position to address those community requests. It shouldn't really be coming to council in staff's opinion. And so that's really the motivation for putting something in place that takes it away, just like our traffic calming policy where things don't really go to council. There's a process where staff does an assessment, looks at how many people are making the request, looks at where it is on the route, whether that could be accommodated within existing service levels, and then makes an informed decision. It still could conceivably come to council for direction, but that would be the exception rather than the norm. So if this is approved by council, we would then kind of delegate that decision-making to our manager of parks with support from the director to make sure that we're not exceeding that service level without coming back to council. So if we got a lot of questions or concerns about the overall service level, or council wanted to have, a minimum of one garbage can in every neighborhood or something like that, that would come back to us as a service level change. And during a budget discussion or capacity discussion, that would be a new program or new service level that we would add, if that addresses your question.
Yeah, that's great. CEO Kaler. It depoliticizes the choices of garbage cans, and which I've come to learn over the last couple of years, 6 years here, that when it comes to operations, I have a tendency to want to step back, to stay out of the weeds and so forth, because we have a bunch of staff that are more in a position of deciding, where the heavy usage is. But I have to admit that I have had calls, and we all have had calls like, we definitely need a garbage can in this area, wherever it is. And you're the mayor, you're the councillor, the elected representative, you have to get me a garbage can. And so I would much rather be able to say, well, that's good, put in your request to operations type of thing, and they can actually decide based on whatever the criteria is, or whether it actually qualifies. Maybe they're the only person on the street, probably not a good move, but it would be a spot for them to use it. So I would welcome that end of it, as long as it had the flexibility of when a resident or a residence, comes forth to operations and say, we feel that the need is great because of the following reasons, and whether it's numbers or whatever, as long as our staff have that flexibility to make that, because it really shouldn't be coming to council to decide where the garbage cans are any more than, where we want to put the street lights. I'm not qualified to make those decisions. So I'm okay with this as it is, but with the flexibility that if during the reconsideration where they're going to be or where they're not going to be, that it comes down to if the situation demands, if the constituents or residents or businesses in our area feel that it's actually critical to have one, then we'll send that to the staff anyways to evaluate whether that's fair or not, and then it will either come to council or it will not. And then we as council have the ability to say, well, we don't think that was a really good decision, staff. We are recommending that this goes through. I think that process would be a far more efficient process to accommodate. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor France.
Yeah, with that, I'm not suggesting that we are the ones to decide where all the garbage cans go. And what I'm saying is I think this policy should be speaking to a point of how they get distributed, because under the way it's currently written, we could put all of them outside this door here, and it meets the policy completely. And like you mentioned with streetlights, you want to have them in many places so that you spread the lighting all around and spread the convenience of the garbage all around, not just having them all in one spot. So it has to meet that need. I think that's what the policy should address. I do think it would be helpful for us if we knew how many are out there and where they are still. I think we should be able to pull up the GIS and be able to plot them. I don't think that would take too long to even throw it up on our screen here just to see. And and it's not just about collecting the most garbage we can. That's the aim of the garbage cans. Isn't like, we're not trying to gather it. We're trying to make it so that when you have it, it's convenient wherever you're walking, and to increase that walkability, because I do think it dictates where people go. So that's my suggestion, is that we get it written into the policy too, that it serves the community better, not just serving the staff level.
Okay, the Councillor Beal is first.
Thank you, Mr.
Go ahead,
Mayor. And my question was going to be about whether or not there would be some flexibility to make adjustments over time, both as to where receptacles might be, as well as other facets of it. So I'm pleased to hear that there would be some flexibility there. And I'm also thinking back to, so for instance, as our CAO mentioned, the park is not as busy, certain times of the year, could something be closed down? I'm also thinking back to a number of years ago when the Downtown Business Association had ambassadors, and they actually pointed out a number of things about garbage cans. And one of them in the downtown area was that, from one perspective, you couldn't actually see that there was a garbage can, and it had to do with just the placement. If it's closer to an intersection, then people can see it from two streets. And if they could see it, there's a better chance they're going to use it if it's something that they don't carry around. So again, I do hope that both picking up on Councillor Frase's suggestion to have information about that, and I don't think we necessarily need it, but to add that hopefully over time staff would have that information to so that these are placed in areas that are of most benefit to the community, but don't demand excess staff work. So yeah, over time, those things make a big difference in people's lives. And also if they are available, then people will use them who might not think to, or might not be able to take things home.
Thank you. CAO Kaler, if you could comment, please.
Thank you. If I may, my trusty assistant here was able to find them. We did provide a map in 2022, so we can certainly get that updated. I'm not sure if that's changed or not, but we do have some much better GIS resources. So we'll recycle or resend that map that was just garbage cans in the downtown. We also recently sent a map of garbage cans at bus stops. So I'll get the staff to combine that and just make sure that that information is provided as well, so that council can see where the existing cans are. And then this policy would allow staff, based on usage, input from the community, input from council, if you're hearing from a lot of people, that, basically would allow them to figure out a way to relocate, redistribute, or if it's feasible within the service level, add some here or there. It really is just intended to put it at the staff technical level to make sure that it's the same service level that we have right now. If council wants to increase the service level and look at hiring, like we did have some discussions, for example, around providing options for recycling, as well as just garbage. And so that came back to a previous council with some cost estimates around doing that. And that at the time council said that wasn't really feasible. It was a bit cost prohibitive at that point, but those are things that we can certainly still revisit with council. This is really intended to just put that at the staff level as opposed to folks coming to you. And like you said, Mr. Mayor, like, I'm the same as you. Like, I don't know, it sounds maybe feasible, but if the staff person is like, that I can't get in there with my equipment, or that means I have to add 20 minutes, or then maybe we don't look at approving that one.
Right. I'm going to make a suggestion at this point that we refer this decision to a committee of the whole.
Okay.
Committee of the
Sure.
whole, whereby as we have the latest GIS, and we have actually committee of the whole we all know what committee of the whole is, to a future meeting anyway, so we can have the GIS and perhaps a staff report to accompany it. And that way we can have a little bit of input into this. I think it's important enough that we should. I remember what Councillor Frase had mentioned before that. So yeah, go ahead, Councillor Frase.
Yeah, with that, would we be able to put it out for the PDBA and the PQBTA? Yes, to have their input on there, just to see if the PDBA has, if in downtown it's been serving the needs of the businesses, and maybe look at, where our common requests from the community have been coming up too. So if there's any spots that have kind of been missed, just so we can kind of see if it's been hitting those marks, that if it's been working for them and satisfying it, then perhaps then it's not as necessary. But like I said, it's just a concern I saw with this policy, the fact that I think it could be super saturated in one spot and still meet the policy.
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea, and, perhaps include the chamber as well, the Chamber of Commerce anyway, so the comment because of the businesses in the area, so they're going to feel maybe the need. So if he included the PDBA, the Tourist Association, and also the Chamber of Commerce, as stakeholders to just give input, and then after that time, if we get the input and then handle that at a committee of the whole, then we can have a more robust discussion.
If I just may
Yeah,
clarify.
yeah. As mentioned, this doesn't seem to be a time sensitive. Nobody's stolen our garbage cans. We don't have to
No.
replace them
If I
before
could just-
Santa gets here.
Oh, sorry, if I could just get some clarity. I'm assuming we want to do this in February because the mayor's not here.
Yeah.
Do you want this before a council meeting or do you want a standalone committee of the whole, just so we can schedule? So
We can do
we
it
would
part of the
start-
council meeting.
Okay.
I would suggest we just go into committee of the whole.
Sure.
We're
the
open to the
February-
public on that. I think that's a fair way of doing it, transparency.
Okay, if I
Yeah.
may, then we'll, the motion could be that we refer it to the February 3rd council and break into committee, and we'll consult or reach out to those 3 organizations that you mentioned for their input for that meeting. We'll bring maps or place maps on the agenda so people can see what the current status is and have the discussion at that time. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Councilor Fraz, would you like to put that through?
Yeah, that would be great. I'll move that.
Okay.
Or there's current motion now, so it would be,
We have this one here. I was going to take a vote to defer this.
okay.
Defer it? Yeah, yeah, I need the deferral and to be replaced with, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if we get a motion, if it is going to be moved by Councillor Frass and seconded by someone, it needs to be voted on, but no debate. And then it would just come back to you at that committee meeting on the 3rd for more fulsome debate.
Okay. Okay, so on the motion to defer, all those in favor? Okay. Do we need a seconder? Yeah. You seconded for it. So it's moved by Councillor Frass to defer, seconded by Councillor Gower. All those in favor? To defer. Thank you. That carries unanimous. Now we have a new motion on the floor. I'll let Councillor Frass place that.
Yes, that the deferral, I think, includes. the motion.
Was it just to defer and that? Okay. Okay, we make it all into one. There we go. We just saved ourselves a lot of time. Okay, that works out fine. Thanks, council. Good discussion. So, for bylaws, 3 readings, we have the 5-year financial plan, 2025 to 2029, number 1594. Do I move or second or further recommendation? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Beal. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That carries unanimous. For bylaws, for 3rd reading, we have Plan Parksville Amendment Bylaw 2024, number 1492.8, map amendment to multi-use residential and development permit area extent adjustment at 1225 Franklin Gull Road. That the recommendation that the Plan Parksville Amendment Bylaw 2024, number 1492.8 be read a 3rd time. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Beal. Any discussion? You're okay? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Gore. You have your hand up. As the secretary, you can talk first if you like. Sure, go ahead. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to say that I will be supporting this, but I would also like to comment that the existing land use with the OCP is community use and tourist commercial. And I would like to make note that that we did not hear from commercial interests or tourism that this should not take place, that there was not a desire to or a great need to keep this in this existing zoning, OCP, and that in fact the Tourism Association brought forth that one of their strategic plan items is in fact to look at non-market and affordable housing. And similarly from the chamber, that is also something that's mentioned in their strategic plan. So I'd just like to mention that we did not hear from the business community or commercial enterprise that this area was really needed for that. And I think that following particularly the pandemic and changes in how people do business, it's maybe not a surprise that that's the case.
Thank you. And Councillor Gore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This application, which has been brought forward by Lions, I first of all want to thank them for their perseverance with this and for building all the housing that they have in the city of Parksville. I happen to live just a block away from one. It's been well run and well served to the public, people who are using that housing. I also want to express some regrets that Lions they have been strung along for so long, trying to find a location where they could actually build some housing. I know they've been to the previous council and the one before. And it's really discouraging for groups like Lions, who do a wonderful job, to be coming forward and build some non-market housing, which we saw the statistics from Director of Planning. The core need for housing is the one that the Lions will be building. And something like this to come to fruition needs a lot of things to line up. At a local level, first, the land. The city needs to provide the land, the zoning, and then they need funding from provincial and, let's say, federal governments and a willing volunteer group to be able to do all the legwork. So it's a monumental ask, like to have something come to fruition like this. I did also hear some concerns in the public hearing. Two things that kind of stuck with me were a change to the OCP. I know I previously spoke about supporting OCP change if it's a direct benefit to the community. There was also talks about privacy concerns from some of the single family homes about this. So I appreciate the public input on this and the engagement of the public on this issue, both in support and opposition. The need for such housing is so dire at this time. The results of this could be increased homelessness, either in the near future or down the road. 70% of this housing will be deeply subsidized, will be subsidized to a third of people's income. That's what's really needed in Parksville when we look at the need for housing from the HART report from the UBC. There are several factors in making this decision, and I'm really open to hearing what other council members have to say, how I vote on this. I do see a lot of good work that Lions have done. I see the public opposition to this, some of it. But a very good point that the councillor just mentioned about the business enterprise not being opposed to the current OCP designation for this. So I'm quite open on this. I really want to hear what other council members think, why this OCP should be amended. The reason being OCP as our strategic priority. And at this time, if I may, Mayor, I want to mention how one of the comments from a community member kind of stuck with me, especially talking about amenities, just being far away from amenities. But once growth does happen, we will likely see some grocery stores, perhaps where the Heritage Center is, kind of come up. But is this the vision we see for this part of the city? Is this going to be something like a Despard block? I'm personally not a big fan of how Despard has developed over time. But those are some of my concerns, like a nice resort area with low density, lots of trees, would this be converted into something much like Despard? Or are we able to do it in a nice way where we can hopefully, if this does go through, and still able to preserve some of that characteristic of that neighborhood, of the resorts that drive so many tourists to our town? So I really want to hear what council members have to say and if they can convince me one way or the other.
Thank you. For the comment, Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council. I want to echo some of the comments maybe made by Councillor Gore with regard to the public hearing, and huge gratitude to everyone who came out and either spoke to us at the public hearing or emailed or phone conversations. I know many of us have spoken with members of the public at the open house and otherwise. So I really want to thank everyone for that. We do really listen to what the community has to say. We don't always maybe vote the way that some people would like us to vote, but we do listen and take into consideration the points that are being made. I do generally have a concern around amending the OCP. I think that people should be able to rely on the OCP to kind of know what their community is going to look like in the future and make their plans accordingly. And I like to be able to point to it when people say, oh, why is this happening and that happening? Well, it's in the OCP. It's out there on paper in black and white. So that's why it's happening. It's permitted under the OCP. So I similarly don't want to say, well, oh, but we changed the OCP. And we haven't done that at this council. We haven't gone out of our way to change the OCP at all. So, and we will be reviewing that. That said, I think a good rationale really for changing the OCP is when there's a community benefit that saves the community money. And a lot of conversation around this particular project was the location and all that. The fact of the matter is the city only has so much land that it can put into position to help the community in this way. And the fact that this is being changed, the OCP, is actually a benefit to the community that if it were some for-profit thing and we're giving an OCP amendment to them to make even more profit, well, that's a little bit different. In this case, we're helping a nonprofit help the community, and moreover, not only is the business community not opposed to this OCP amendment from all the communications we've received, one of the critical partners in the community is very much in favor of this OCP amendment. I'm a liaison to the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, and they are very excited at that board table about this proposal exactly because of the location. They like the location. Its close proximity to Resort Row is a huge asset because we do need people that can live close by to where they work. Yes, they'll have to travel a bit further than people living downtown to get groceries, but they will every day be able to go to work is the aspiration with this project. Every day they'll be able to basically walk to work. So I think this is a huge asset to this project. I want to thank Lions for all the amazing work and sticking out this super long meeting as well. So thank you for that. And I will be supporting this. And I'm very glad that, you know, in the context of the conversation we've had today about the need for housing and what we can do, this is something that we can do as a council to ensure that we have a community that has housing for people at all stages and walks of life. And I think that's really critically important for us to do this table.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a few notes that I've made. And of course, I agree with the previous two comments from previous councillors because it is a severe need that's here in our community. So I made some notes here. I said the Lions Society have successfully operated several projects in the Parksville area for a long time. And that does say something about the association, because if they've been successful in the past, it'll be successful in the future. I can't imagine why they wouldn't be, because they're a very good organization. Also, I've talked to people on both sides, and they all agree that we need to have the housing. There's no one that said we didn't need it. All people feel that we really do need it for our people. And also some other things that are about the location. They were really concerned about the people that are there, just like Councillor Francis just mentioned about location. The people there are not like they can't walk to shopping, but there's going to be a shuttle provided. And so I just, it's all the pluses about this. And here we are providing it. It's not a developer who's trying to put a project together. This is for the community specifically. So I'm supporting this, and I've had, a lot of concern because of my neighbors, because I live near the area, and they've been talking to me, and I've had many, many phone calls telling me from my neighborhood supporting this, really personal phone calls. So I think that it isn't an easy decision, and that's why we're here to do this. And sometimes it's tough, but I support this. I think that the Lions Society will do an excellent job for us. And I think that that's what I'm relying on, because I think their track record is very good. So thank you. Thank you, Lions Society. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Wood, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. If you're in elected office, not all the decisions are as nice to do, like a Moby mat. Some decisions are a little more tricky, and that's part of the job. When Councillor Martin steals my line about everybody who communicated with us, almost everybody says we need non-market housing. I try to find common ground, and the common ground in all of the correspondence that we received, whether it was in person, whether it was email, phone calls, et cetera, was that we need more non-market housing. Our housing market across, the country, the province, Vancouver Island, Parksville, you're coming close to $1 million for a single family detached home. So if you can scrape together, $50,000 for a down payment, then maybe you're in pretty decent shape, but that is not easy for people to do these days, especially as our dollar kind of devalues. So I have to sleep at night, and I'm going to vote in support of this. And I appreciate the Lions bringing this forward, and staff as well for the carrying Lions along. Thanks.
Any other comments? First time speakers? Go ahead, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Earlier, I was speaking just to the OCP amendment part of this, but the conversations I think are generally about both the items here. I certainly listened to what people had to say at the public hearing and read absolutely every email that came in up to the time of the public hearing, and deleted a few that were coming in afterwards. But as has been mentioned here, the common theme was that we do need the housing. I will mourn the loss of some of those trees that will have to come down. It was really nice to see all that greenery as you come to that intersection. There still will be some trees by all accounts, and that will be lovely. And there are trees around the area. The location was the common theme of with people who were concerned and opposed this change. However, it's a residential area immediately across the street. It's a residential area kitty corner. It's a residential area along Arbutus. So it's not like having residences there is completely out of the ordinary in that area. So I certainly considered that as well. Some people brought up the concern that it was too far from town, but in fact, all those other residences managed to get to town for their groceries or order things online or get a neighbor to do something. So in fact, it's not insurmountable. I do know that the bus goes by. I know that the school bus goes there. When I was a principal at the elementary school, we had at least one child who came from that area and others that came from beyond there. So none of those things are insurmountable. They may be a little awkward at times. And even for people who do choose to ride a bike or walk, I've actually done that area many times on foot from precisely that area into town and back again. And it is, as our mayor mentioned earlier, that bit just by Plummer Road is the scary bit. But in fact, if you're on foot, you don't go along the highway other than that little bit. So then that will be improved in the near future. So for all of those reasons, I really don't see that this location is insurmountable. And clearly, we need to have this increased housing and to have it brought to our community by Lions Housing Society is wonderful. They are a local organization. They certainly have a proven track record, and they live and work and provide in our community. So I think that's a win-win-win. And I truly believe that assuming if this in fact goes ahead and meets approval, that I think at the end of the day, when it is built and people see what an asset it is and how attractive it is and how well run it is, that those fears that people had will be alleviated. If it is a time, there were two things though that did jump out at me with people who were opposed to this. One was some concern about privacy, particularly the people who live immediately across the street at Parkhurst Place. And I really hope that the architect involved with the development could install frosted glass around the balconies. I think that would help and it would be very attractive, as well as considering if there are hallway windows that look across to Parkhurst Place, that perhaps those be, allow light, but not necessarily just a regular glazed glass, sorry. The other thing that I thought was very interesting was a comment about people driving along there trying to beat the light. So that must be people who are coming up Northwest Bay Road rather than going to the light, going ahead and zooming and over to Arbutus and then to get ahead. So I thought that was very interesting. I know that type of driving behavior does exist elsewhere in our city, and I think it will be something that needs to be monitored. And if something needs to be done at a future date, that's certainly something that could be addressed through some traffic calming. So for all of those reasons, I will be supporting this.
First-time speaker. Okay. Any other first-time speakers? Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Council. I would just like to summarize a little bit here of what I've heard and what I've observed on this this particular bylaw. The OCP is indeed a living document, and proving that today is that living document is being considered to be amended, which is exactly what it's for. And it's gone through the proper process and so forth to get the input in it. And I think we've done our due diligence to make sure that that remains a good community plan. So that's just regarding the OCP. I can also comment to Councillor Beal that the school bus every day stops off at Heritage Mall with children as a drop-off point right at Heritage Mall. The other fact of the matter is this is the only service location in the city of Parksville available that we can contribute to this affordable housing project. And that's for the sake of individuals that don't understand. The reason it's affordable is it's free land, and land in Parksville, within city of Parksville, comes at a very dear price right now. And so this is being donated by the taxpayers of the city of Parksville to create affordable workforce housing. And that's, I think, showing our social responsibilities as a city, municipality, of what we do for our people. That has been said loud and clear that there is a specific need for this type of housing. So I'm proud to be part of that. I'm proud to have collaborated with the Lions Association because they've just been amazing and had so much patience. And some of you in the audience right now knows how long this is going on, and we're finally at that stage. And I thank you for your patience. The other thing is that this went to a public hearing, which we did. It was a very respectful public hearing. I was very pleased with how everybody remained calm and respectful. And it was a good opportunity to hear from those that may be affected. However, the public hearing and our council meetings are held at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The very people that will be most affected by this, is the affordable workforce housing, are probably not available to go to that public hearing because they're working. They're working very low paying jobs. Quite often, I know 2 jobs to make ends meet. Those voices were not heard at the public hearing. although I know that they supported this project. But the other thing as well is that as far as contacting us and so forth, these people are working double jobs and they're working hard. And so it's hard to get in at a political level and do some advocating for themselves. These people are just existing, and they have chosen to live or work in the city of Parksville. It's our obligation to actually provide them options for housing. And that is what this does here. And I'm very pleased to support this project. And I am hopeful that it goes through to benefit all those people that truly need it, that I know they're not listening right now because they're working at their non-high paying jobs, that they're going to have a place to live where they don't have to take transit in from Nanaimo, where it is actually less expensive to live, but yet their jobs are in Parksville. So I feel we have an obligation to those individuals, and I think we can fulfill that today. Thank you. Councillor Gore, you had your hand up for a second time? Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, and thank you, Council, for a good discussion on this. I heard a couple of things that this is the only kind of lot of land that we have that we can provide to the Lions. This also, in my opinion, has lessons learned for us as a council that we should be looking perhaps to purchasing some more lands that in the future, I look forward to inviting Lions again, if this passes, for another housing project that you can build. The scarcity of land, and I don't like to blame previous councils, but I think we should be actively looking at purchasing more lands to such opportunities when they come knocking at our doors. We have the options at either the downtown core or other commercial nodes that we can offer these clubs, and then we can build more housing in the future. Thank you.
Any further discussion, Council? All those in favor? That carries unanimous. Council, thank you for that. I would like to say bylaws number 4 for the third reading, zoning and development amendment bylaw 2024 number 2000.151 regarding the map and text amendment to CD 36 at 1225 Franklin Skull Road. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that zoning and development amendment bylaw 2024 number 2000.151 be read a third time? Moved by Councillor Greddens, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you, Council. Thank you so much. And thank you for those in the audience as well that endured this meeting. Council, are there any notices of motion for this at this time? Sir? I'll just wait. Thank you. I'll just wait for the delegations to leave. That'd be good. Thank you. Number 6, we have liaison reports. Liaison reports, you know the rules. Oh, we're going to have Councillor Wood up front today regarding the FCM advocacy days.
Thank you, Mayor. What are those rules? I'm supposed to keep it short and concise?
Perhaps.
Councillor Grenz and I were just in Ottawa for FCM Advocacy Days. Advocacy Days, for those who are listening and may not know, with regards to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, you meet with MPs and party leaders in Ottawa, and you bring local government issues to those elected leaders in Ottawa, hoping that our federal government will listen to those concerns from the local government and ideally act on those. The main ask at the FCM is to help local governments pay for all the services that we provide. We provide 60% of the infrastructure servicing, and really we only collect 10 to 12% of the taxes across the entire country. Property taxes are a regressive means. They're not based on income, and they're kind of based on unrealized value. And so they're not the best way to pay for things. And we see across the whole board, I keep a little spreadsheet of property taxes and they're going up all the time. We try to do our very best to balance services with our property taxes here in Parksville. But, you know, on the spreadsheet, we have 8%, 9%, 12%, 15% property tax increase. And year after year, if those keep going up, it's probably not sustainable. And so really the ask at the FCM advocacy days is to show these numbers to elected officials, many of which who haven't worked in council or have been mayor, and so they haven't really dealt with government at the level that we deal with. And so it's really to shine a light on those issues, and we hope that the federal government is listening. And so I just wanted to mention that that's what Councillor Grenz and I were in Ottawa for last week. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that report. Councillor Grenz, do you have anything to add, or are you okay? Yeah, okay, you're fine with that. That's good. So first off, I'd like to thank Councillor Grenz and Councillor Wood for dedicating a large amount of their personal life to this advocacy. It takes advocacy for the city of Parksville to a whole new level that I don't believe historically we've been there before. And I could stand corrected on that, but I thank you for your taking the initiative to get involved with the FCM as the overall federal body of jurisdiction in Canada here. So thank you for that and your considerable sacrifice made together. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Councillor Martin now for the next liaison report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the Parksville Historical Society, there are a few changes happening with the manager, Rachel, moving at the end of the year. She worked full-time for 6 months and part-time in the winter. Actually, her contract finished at the end of the year too. So this is sort of expected. The AG, well, not necessarily, but could have been renewed, but it isn't. The AGM was on December 7th, and they brought in the new president, Nancy Martin, and with the past president, Susan Wishmer, as a member of large. So it'll be, well, how can I say, well governed with their background. And Nancy, as a matter of interest, in Saskatchewan, worked with the provincial government with museums. So she's, I would say, very highly qualified. Also, she sent this message to me today. It's they're going to be closing until the end of the month, until May. So there will be May to September that they're opened. And I was kind of thinking of this as we're talking about garbage dispensers, because there's one there too, one of the garbage dispensers there. So I don't know if that makes any difference, but I thought that was kind of curious because it's a beautiful looking receptacle in the middle of the museum. So they won't be opening till May. And this caroling event on Friday is not just a regular caroling event where you're going to listen to the carols. It's involved with the people that are there, and it's a family affair, and it's quite different. And it being in the Knox Church is kind of historical. So there'll be the and you all got this little invitation, I think, in your boxes, and RSVP if you can come. And leading the carols is from Knox Church, so that's kind of unique. So that's what I wanted to sort of reemphasize, at 7 o'clock. If enough people from the city could come, the council could come, that would be excellent. They can hold 60 people, and your children could come. It's not just, it's involved, and there'll be refreshments too. So my next report is the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region. There will be an open house at their new office January 24th, which is important for the public to know. It's 124 West 2nd Avenue in Qualicum, and that's 10 to 5 on January 24th. There's also a climate change forum there, and they were given a grant about this. And on the 15th of January from 2:30 to 4:30, if anyone's interested to know more about this climate change resiliency, because I've got detailed information and reasons why, and that's happening on January 15th at the same property. What's kind of unique about this house, it's a house, so it's quite roomy, and it's been now the head of the biosphere, so that's excellent. This and also the Brant Festival is April 4th to 7th, just so you have a note of that. Because there's also, see now, it used to be Nature's Trust, but now it's the Biosphere that's running the Brant Festival. So that's April 4th to 7th. And there's a major change for the PDBA. That's not on our notice here, but they are moving into a new office. And it's kind of a big deal for them to move. So many papers here, I tell you. So much going on. Anyway, the PDBA is actually sort of half moved into their new office at the corner, right on the plaza there, 131 Alberni Avenue. So that's the perfect place for them because they do have a lot of events that go on there. Some of the things we saw today was from the PDBA. So they're all quite excited. They're painting up there. It's quite remarkable. It's a big deal to be moving, and they're moving right now. They'll be there permanently. So that is my 3 things that I have to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Any questions or?
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Yeah.
Any questions for Councillor Martin?
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to follow up on that, seeing as how the executive director from the PDBA is here, does that they include more than you, Teresa, or are you the they who is doing the painting at your so is this a call for volunteers to come by and give you a hand? No, you've got. All right. So I just thought, wanted to make sure you're covered there. All right. Thank you. Just a couple of quick announcements. One, the mayor, Councillor Gore, and myself all attended and took part in the audit committee, which met fairly recently, a couple of weeks ago now. And I think we're in good shape. That meeting was ahead of the auditors actually coming in to have a visit and look at a few things, but that was really called for since there have been some changes with regulations as to how revenue is recorded. So it was a minor point, but a significant one, and that went very well. Secondly, I'd like to mention my screen has gone blank. I will mention that I will be attending a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce tomorrow afternoon, so I don't have anything to report about that. Again, transitions are the theme of the day for the Chamber as they look ahead and have some changes on the board and elsewhere. With regards to the Arts Council, there was a board meeting December 11th, and the Macmillan Arts Centre will be closed from December 23rd to 21st, so that's it's still open this week and into the weekend. So that does allow people time to go and visit the existing exhibits, although they carry on into February and they really are fantastic. And some of the smaller pieces, I will mention, they're really quite lovely and they're actually quite affordable. So I've got my eye on 2, but there are a few red dots going on some of those paintings. The center is open, as I mentioned, this week, which includes the gift shop, which has a beautiful variety of items created by local artists. People might not be aware of that, but they are all locally created. And they also, you can go online on the website. There's a lot of information about the exhibits, and one can shop the gift shop online. So that's all I have to report about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beal. Council, do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation pursuant to section 91E of the Community Charter? The council proceed to a closed meeting to consider an item relating to land. Moved by Councillor Gore, seconded by Councillor Wood. All those in favor?